PokeClass is sponsored by CollectorsCash.com, and they now have Dark Explorers in stock at incredible prices. Are you looking for that last card to complete your deck, or looking to boost your collection in any set of the game? Then Collector's Cash is where you need to be. They stock all of your boxes, tins, and singles of Pokemon, and any other card game for that matter, at very competitive prices. So make sure you visit www.collectorscash.com after the show. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 74 of PokeClass. Now last week I know I said it was my last deck analysis, but what I really meant was it was my last new deck analysis. Because today I will be doing my last one, but it's on the revived decks, which are kind of old right now, or classics in the metagame, which are Zekrom and Celebi Mewtwo Tornadus. Both of these are still in, or considered to be, two of the top 4 decks at the moment in the runnings for Nationals, and potentially Worlds as well. So I wanted to give you an updated list with those Dark Explorers cards in that you now all have and are excited about. So without further ado, I'm going to be giving you the strategy, the lists, and the text for both of these decks to make sure you get the most out of them for testing for Nationals and Worlds if you're going. So let's get straight to it. So the first deck I want to talk about today is Zekrom Eelektrik, or Zekrom as most of you know it by now. It's been around for a long while now, and most of you should be familiar with it, and if you're not, then this is the video to keep you updated. It's got a few extra additions for its arsenal in Dark Explorers, and they will be implemented in future tournaments, such as important ones like Nationals and Worlds coming up. So what I'm going to go over first is the strategy. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but for those of you that aren't fully aware of the strategy, then here it is. Your main card is Eelektrik, which you run usually 4-3 line of, where I'll get to the list in a second, and it has the Dynamotor ability, which allows you to attach lightning from the discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon while it's in play, and that's for each Eelektrik you have in play. So if you have 3 Eelektrik, you can do it 3 times per turn, and then you have your attachment as well. So that's 4 attachments in a turn, and getting 3 Eelektrik on the field isn't always heard of, but it can happen, and that probably means you're in good standing to win the game. Eelektrik strong energy acceleration just gives it that power it needs to power up your attackers that either use colorless energy or lightning energy, or a mixture of the two, to just get powerful attackers on the field in one turn. It can also feature surprise tech such as Terrakion, which I'll get to later on, and Eelektrik just makes sure that you can power it up in one turn and get it going for as much damage as possible. And that is pretty much your strategy really. You start off with the Dynamos, evolve them to Eelektriks, and because they're only a stage 1, this can happen from the second turn, which means your energy acceleration be really quick. You use cards like Ultra Ball and Junkarm, Juniper, stuff like that to get lightning energy into the discard pile while searching out your Pokemon and reusing trainers and drawing cards. So it's just a really good asset to the deck and keeps the energy going as quickly as possible basically. So now you know the quick strategy of it, let's get onto the list, and here is a full list for you. Usually I give out skeleton lists, but today I'm going to be giving out full lists, just so you can see how much that Dark Explorers has an impact on the set. So first up we have 14 Pokemon. I have the 4-3 Eelektrik line, which I just talked about, then I have 2 Zekrom from Black and White. A lot of people have started taking this out, but Zekrom is still a very powerful Pokemon. You do 120 damage, and that's enough to KO any EX, even with a Eviolite attached, except for Groudon of course, but Groudon will be an issue, but we have that covered in a second. And yeah, 120 damage or 100 if you're attacking a Pokemon with an Eviolite really just isn't something to shy away from really. It's 2-hit KO in the EXs as I just said, and only gives up 1 prize, which is probably the main aspect about it that really wants me to keep this in this deck. You only give up 1 prize, even though you damage yourself, you could be taking 2-hit KOs on EXs while they're only doing damage to you and possibly only getting 1 prize off you while you retaliate with another Zekrom or something else you powered up on the bench. Up next, 2 Mewtwo EX. 2 Mewtwo is all you need right now. Mewtwo isn't as powerful as it once was by people running 3 or even 4 in their deck, and 2 Mewtwo EX will be able to combo well with the Pokemon below, combos well with Eelektrik, so you can get as much energy onto it in one turn as possible. You can surprise KO other Mewtwo's and pretty much any other EX in the format. So on to the next one, and it's Thunderous from Emerging Powers. People used to run 2, 3 or even 4 of this in this deck, but you don't really need it anymore. The deck has really speedy starts anyway and can get the energy onto the field pretty much turn 1 and turn 2 as well. So Thunderous is nice to have because you can do a turn 2 80 and yeah, it just gets the energy out of the deck when you really need it. Up next is a new card from Dark Explorers, which is Tornadus EX. Usually people will tech 1 or 2 regular Tornadus for merging powers to deal with the fighting matchup, but now all you need is Tornadus EX. It resists fighting for 20, has 2 really powerful attacks, one that you can really make use of in the first 2 turns of the game, and it just has really powerful 2-shot capabilities on the Pokemon that give you problems, such as Terrakion and essentially Groudon. This thing with an Eviolite will give Groudon some issues, and Terrakion especially some issues, and we'll just keep those fighting decks on the back foot, which is really what you want to do with this deck, because it does have that really bad fighting weakness. And the last Pokemon is Shaman from Unleashed, pretty much a staple in almost all decks at the moment, just to get those massive Mewtwo KOs and to move around your energy when you haven't got any other way to attack. It powers up a really powerful attacker in 1 turn and can get some really good Mewtwo sweeps in there as well. So onto the trainers and supporters, and I've got 33 in here for you, which feature 4 Professor Juniper, 4 Pon or Professor Oak's New Theory, and 2 N. These supporter lines just keep your deck flowing as optimally as possible, and in here I also have 3 Random Receiver, as you can see just below them in the list. And this just keeps the deck running really nicely. Random Receiver hits the supporters every single time, so you're going to be as consistent as possible. Up next, for Junkam, for Catcher, obvious combo. You need to take cheap prizes in the early game with Catcher and Junkam to search out more things with Jewel Ball and Level Ball later on, get back Eviolites, reuse plus powers. Yeah, it's just a great asset, and you can't really deal with less than 4 Junkam. I've already talked about Random Receiver. 3 is quite a high number, but it just keeps your deck as consistent as possible, which you really need in a large tournament such as Nationals and Worlds. 3 Jewel Ball and 2 Level Ball seems to be enough to get your Pokemon out. You will draw them quite frequently with cards such as Professor Juniper and Pon. Sometimes the flips don't go your way with Jewel Ball, but it doesn't really matter too much because you can Junkam for them later on when you just need them that one heads, and Level Ball is always there to get out your weaker Pokemon if you really need it. 2 Eviolite is essential in this deck now. I feel it deals with EXs really well, especially as I said earlier with the Zekrom. It can stop return KOs when you've only got 2 energy on your Mewtwo, and just keeps things alive for longer, especially with Tornadus EX and your EX Pokemon. Plus power is what you need to keep hitting over certain amounts with these massive EXs. You need to keep hitting over certain amounts of damage just to get KOs. When they have Eviolite, this plus powers really help out. Switch is because a lot of your Pokemon do have 2 or higher retreat cost. Electric is your main thing you want to get out here. You don't want to be wasting your 4 double colorless on retreating Electrics, because it just wastes the power that you have later on with Mewtwo or anything else really, Tornadus EX. Switch just helps to get you the Pokemon out of the active spot you don't want there, and yeah, I'm sure you know how it works. And finally you have 1 Super Rod, basic recovery in the deck. If you have to Juniper away some essential things earlier on, like Mewtwo, your Thundurus, your Tornadus in the fighting matchup, then you always have the option to get it back with Super Rod. And finally you have 13 Energy, which are 4 double colorless and 9 Lightning. You can go down to 8 Lightning, but that is incredibly low, and I just feel like I don't get the energy in the discard pile as easily. And that is pretty much your full list that I'd expect to be quite standard, and is probably the most consistent list you could run. You can run things like Terrakion, but I would suggest running something like more Energy Search and 2 Fighting Energy. The Energy Search makes sure that you can, if you can get it in the discard pile, you can Junkam for a Fighting Energy when you need it the most to put down a Terrakion, and 1 or 2 Terrakion is probably enough to deal with stuff like Darkrai and the Mirror Match as well. The Terrakion version of the deck has been becoming quite popular, but it's just not as consistent for my liking in a tournament such as Nationals. This version of the deck without Terrakion just keeps your games coming as consistent as possible, and even in the mirror and against Darkrai, you still have, obviously you have still a massive chance against those when you get set up as much as possible, and I don't feel you really need to cover it up with techs like Terrakion. Other techs you can possibly use are a copy of Smeargle and 2 Skyarrow Bridge. I'd probably take out a Random Receiver and possibly a Switch to put 2 Skyarrow Bridges in, and for the Smeargle you could possibly take out a supporter, since Smeargle will be using your supporters for you out of your opponent's hand, and then you can use your own later on. What this helps you to do is keep as consistent as possible without using your own supporters. It can get you going faster in some cases, and yeah, it's just a really nice card to have. Another powerful lightning type was given to us in Dark Explorers, and it's Raikou EX. This guy is actually really versatile and pretty good in this deck. For 2 lightning energy and a colorless, it does 100 damage to anywhere on your opponent's side of the field, so that can be active or bench, and you have to discard all the energy attached to Raikou. Now obviously in an electric deck this isn't going to be bad, because the majority of energy you've discarded will be lightning, which means they'll be ready to power up another attacker the next turn. 100 damage snipe is really strong in the mirror because you can pick off opposing electrics, or you can catch up an electric to stall and snipe around the outside. This can also be handy in 2-hit KO and EXs that have been retreated to the bench to try and avoid a KO, and it's just a really versatile Pokemon. The first attack isn't too bad either. If you play this in the Sky Arrow Bridge version, you can get free retreat on it when it's done its business, and yeah, definitely try it out. And that's pretty much it for the Zekrom deck. Those are 2 versions for you, the Tracheon version, 3 versions actually, the Tracheon version, this consistent version, and the Smeargle version, which is also very consistent. Try up all 3. If you want to test against Zekrom, try against all 3. This has very good matchups across the board. Most matchups are 50-50 or better, even the fighting ones, if you play it safe and test against them. Just keep on testing. So I'm going to move on to Celebi, Mewtwo, Tornadus next, and a deck that's almost been forgotten but is still very powerful. So first, let's go over the strategy of Celebi, Mewtwo, Tornadus, or CMT as you probably know it by now. Your main energy acceleration, which any deck really needs to stay competitive right now, is Celebi Prime. And with its power, Forest Breath, when it's in the active position, you get to attach a grass energy from your hand to one of your benched Pokemon, or the active if you really need to do that. And because this deck runs entirely off of colorless attackers, it doesn't matter that it's grass energy, and it can take full advantage of double colorless as well. The main idea of this deck is to get a turn 1 80, 100 or even more off on the first turn, because you can utilize Tornadus EX's first attack, its second attack, Mewtwo EX's X-Ball, and regular Tornadus's Hurricane. Each of these does massive damage on the first turn. You just need access to a Celebi Prime, a double colorless, a grass energy, an attacker, and a way to switch out, which you either run Switch, Sky Arrow Bridge, or a combination of the 2. So the ideal game gets you off to a really fast start with a massive attack on the first turn, possibly donking in the process. When this doesn't happen, your turn 2 is pretty secure as well. You get big attackers up all game and just keep them alive for as long as possible while taking cheap prizes off your opponent's weak Pokemon. So that's pretty much the strategy of the deck, and let's move on to a full list, which you can find right here. This list is probably the most consistent I could come up with. There's no weird text in here or anything, but I will cover those in a second. So we start off with 12 Pokemon, which begins with 4 Celebi Prime. As I mentioned just now, it's your primary source of energy acceleration and keeps the deck as fast as it can be. 2 Tornadus EX from Dark Explorers, make sure that you can get the turn 130, 60 or 100 on the first turn, which is amazing. 2 Mewtwo EX just to counter the rest of the Mewtwo's out there and to get massive KOs and even donks on stuff like Dynamo. When you pair this card with constant energy acceleration, you can get massive KOs as with Zekrom Eels. So move on to 1 Tornadus from Merging Powers, which used to be your only Tornadus to be able to utilize in this deck, but now turn 180 is still very strong and it only gives up 1 prize in the process, which is very important with Tornadus. It does 2-shot a lot of Pokemon that aren't EXs, but paired with plus power you can get some EX KOs in there, as well as moving some energy around with Hurricane. And then you have your support Pokemon, which are Smeargle and Shaman. Both of these cards do the same thing as they do in Zekrom Eels. They keep your consistency up and able to move energy around as much as you like. Because you need Celebi Prime in the active spot, it can be a bit awkward to get the energy on the right attacker you want and retreat at the same time. So Shaman is just there to move energy across if you don't really want to promote Celebi after a KO. So that's pretty much your Pokemon and your strategy for now, so let's move on to trainers, supporters and stadiums, which you have 35 of. We start off with another standard line, but with 1 more N. It's 4 Press Juniper, 4 Pon, and 3 N, and it just keeps as consistent as possible. 4 Catcher and 4 Junkarm is standard again, and 4 Dual Ball because all of your Pokemon are basic, pretty much. If you aren't flipping well on the day and only get a couple of heads, that doesn't really matter as long as you have 1 attacker on the field that you can deal with your opponent's threats with. 3 Switch keeps your field as versatile as possible when you don't have Sky or Bridge out. Just having the 3 Switch makes sure you can get Celebis out of the active spot and move your attackers around as frequently as possible when you don't have Sky or Bridge in play. And when you do have Sky or Bridge in play, it just makes your energy acceleration even faster because you could possibly be using 2 Forest Breaths a turn. 2 Plus Power and 2 Eviolite are your 2 kind of techie trainers. Plus Power, as in Zekrom Eels, it just helps to tip those KOs. The 2 Eviolite is questionable, but Tornadus EX plus Eviolite is just an incredible attacker at the moment. EXs like Darkrai will have a tough time to one-shot it, but do be wary of electric types when playing this deck. Zekrom will take Tornadus is out in one go, even with Eviolites. You just need to watch out for that when playing and go straight ahead with your Mewtwo, and that's another reason for running a normal Tornadus as well. And finally, you have a Stadium, which is 3 Sky Arrow Bridge. This just keeps your max damage output in the first couple of turns with Tornadus EX, and just a double colorless when you can't get your Celebi Prime engine going, and gives your Pokemon free retreat when you need them, when you need to use Celebi Prime's Poke Power in the turns of the game. Onto your energy now, and you have 13, 4 double colorless and 9 grass. Exactly the same as Zekrom Eels, but with obviously grass energy instead of lightning, and it's just the most consistent energy line I've found out there at the moment. Both lists are very similar but have very different ideas in the game. The Zekrom Eels, to me, I feel it has a much longer game, whereas Celebi Mewtwo Tornadus is very threatened by lightning types, but it can stand its own against stuff like Mono Terrakion, the fighting decks, and Darkrai. So definitely try both of these decks out, and I'll move on to some techs for CMT. So another thing similar with Zekrom Eels is you can include a Terrakion tech when you're struggling with stuff like the Zekrom Eels matchup. It's not so much for the Darkrai matchup because you can deal with that quite nicely when you have a Tornadus EX with an Eviolite, but Darkrai can still be an issue, and Terrakion can be there for both matchups. Zekrom Eels is arguably your worst matchup because of your main attacker, Tornadus EX, and regular Tornadus are weak to lightning, basically. So adding in a Terrakion or 2 and a couple of fighting energy, along with some energy search and super rods, and you should be ready to go. I'm not sure what I'd take out, possibly some consistency cards, which is really not what you want to do. Adding Terrakion into decks as a tech really does make it a bit more clunky because it's hard to search out the energy when you most need it, when you've got the perfect board and you can get it onto the field in one turn. When your opponent's taken a prize and they're playing a Darkrai deck or a Zekrom Eels deck, then it's a really good attacker to have. But when you just can't make it, it just makes other matchups where you can't really use it, such as the Mirror, much worse, because if your opponent's running a consistent version and you're running a version with Terrakion, you just have less of a chance to get set up as quickly as your opponent. So definitely think twice about it. And other techs that you can include, stuff like Regigigas used to be a classic in this deck. It's still a very strong Pokemon, but with people attacking Terrakion everywhere, do be wary of it. But do consider it if you're seeing too many lightning types. If you're really struggling against the lightning matchup, I would possibly consider Regigigas before Terrakion, because Regigigas, you just need to find one space since you don't need to change anything else anywhere else, because it can use Eviolite, double colorless, and any other energy. So it just adds to your arsenal of colorless attackers, and yeah, it's a really good attacker as well. And to be honest, there's not much else you can add to CMT to make it that much better. It's just really fast. You utilize all of the really fast and colorless attackers already, so you don't really want to be adding too much more to make it more complicated. The most complicated you can get is the Terrakion version. Do try out the Terrakion version and this consistent version in your testing for decks to play for Nationals and to play against to test, because players will be playing both versions. The Terrakion version, possibly more because Terrakion's just getting a lot of hype at the moment, is very strong. Test against them both. And that is pretty much both of your decks revisited for the Dark Explorers set, and for testing for Nationals and Worlds if you're going. They're both very strong decks still. They're kind of getting overshadowed by Darkrai because of its incredible dominance at Battle Roads, but I'm sure the hype will die down soon. These decks do have strong matchups, or at least even matchups, against Darkrai, and can take it on head first, so definitely try them out if you're looking for something that doesn't involve Darkrai, and definitely test against them if you're using Darkrai if you want to do well at Nationals this year. So thanks for watching this episode of PokeClass. I hope you enjoyed this video, and next week I'll have a roundup of Battle Roads for you and what you should expect for Nationals. So again, thanks for watching. Please leave a like below or in the top right hand corner wherever you're watching this video, and please leave a comment too. I read them all and reply to them all as well, so if you've got any questions for me, any cool ideas for decks, or any advice you want for Nationals, then please comment below. Other than that, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.